In this second part of my lecture series on accounting cycle, I'll be discussing how to prepare a 10-column worksheet. Like financial statements, trial balance, and other reports, the worksheet must have a heading consisting of 3 lines: the name of the organization, the word worksheet, and the date for a certain period of time, such as for the year ended or for the month ended, whichever is applicable, not as of a certain date. This worksheet is called a 10-column worksheet not because there are 10 columns, but because there are 10 money columns. The first 2 money columns are for the unadjusted trial balance, divided into the debit column and the credit column. The third and fourth money columns are for the adjustments, again divided into debit and credit columns. The next 2 money columns are for the adjusted trial balance, with a debit column and a credit column. The 7th and 8th money columns are for the income statement or statement of comprehensive income, again with a column for debit and another for credit. The last 2 money columns are for the statement of financial position or balance sheet, and not surprisingly, also with a debit and a credit column. After writing the column headings, look at the unadjusted trial balance, which was done as part of step number 4 of the accounting cycle, and copy all the account names there to this first column of the worksheet, and their respective balances or amounts to these first 2 money columns. That is the reason why these first 2 money columns have the heading unadjusted trial balance, because the figures here come from the unadjusted trial balance done in step number 4. After copying all the accounts and figures, you have to get the total of both the debit column and the credit column by adding these figures, not by copying from the unadjusted trial balance. The reason why it is advised that you perform the addition operation for these figures and not just copy the total from the unadjusted trial balance is to make sure that you have copied each of those figures correctly. Note that the total debit here must equal the total credit here. By adding these figures, when the total debit does not equal the total credit, then you will at once realize there must be a mistake somewhere. If you will just copy the totals from the unadjusted trial balance prepared in step 4, you will not realize the mistake immediately until you continue doing the worksheet, and then towards the latter part only will you realize that there was a mistake somewhere. By then, finding that mistake may prove to be time-consuming since you've gone a long way already in your worksheet preparation. So please remember and follow that advice. Get the total of both the debit and the credit columns by adding the figures, not by copying from the unadjusted trial balance. And please don't forget to double rule your total debit and your total credit. Then, on these third and fourth money columns called adjustments, the adjusting entries are placed. For instance, your first adjusting entry is a debit to office supplies and a credit to supplies expense for 3,500. Look for the account name office supplies from among the accounts written here. Of course, you do not have to really read all the accounts here from cash up to the last expense account, because you know these account names are written in proper order from the current assets to the non-current assets, including the contra asset accounts, down to the last expense account. Since you are looking for the account office supplies, you should look for it among the first accounts listed here, because office supplies is a current asset. Do you see office supplies here? No. In that case, you must write office supplies here below the last account name. Just skip one row after the totals of the first two money columns for a better looking worksheet presentation. And then, since office supplies of 3,500 is debited in your first adjusting entry, write 3,500 here under the debit column of these adjustments columns. As a guide in recording the adjusting entries in the journal later on, it is better to label each figure you write in these money columns for adjustments with letters or numbers. So here, write letter A, because this 3,500 is part of the first adjusting entry. Then, what was the credited account in the first adjusting entry I mentioned a few minutes ago? Supplies expense, also for 3,500. So look for the account name supplies expense here. Do we have it here? Yes, this one. Therefore, we do not have to write supplies expense below this office supplies. All we need to do is write 3,500 here on the credit column. Then again, write letter A to emphasize that this is part of the first adjusting entry. Let us assume further that the second adjusting entry has a debit to depreciation expense and a credit to accumulated depreciation in the amount of 40,000. Again, look for the account name depreciation expense here. Do we have it? No. Therefore, we need to write depreciation expense below office supplies. There it is now. And not to forget the amount, 40,000 here on the debit column of the adjustments columns. Then, place letter B here, because this is part of the second adjusting entry. After that, look for the credited account accumulated depreciation. It's here. So, we just have to write the amount of 40,000 along this row under the credit column of the adjustments. You have to do the same procedures for all the other needed adjusting entries. Let's say the last adjusting entry is with regards to the merchandise inventory at the end of the accounting period per physical count under the periodic inventory system in the amount of 245,000. Although there is merchandise inventory here, my preferred method is not to use this row for the merchandise inventory end, because I leave this row for the inventory beginning alone. Instead, I prefer to write merchandise inventory end here below. And of course, along this row, the amount of 245,000 under the debit column of the adjustments. As for the credited account of income summary, it is also to be written here after merchandise inventory end. Since nowhere up here can we find that account name income summary. And of course, the amount of 245,000 pesos under the credit column. And not to forget the letter. And also here for the merchandise inventory end of 245,000. And just like in the first two money columns, you need to add the debit and credit columns of the adjustments and double rule its total. The total debit again must equal the total credit. Otherwise, something must be wrong and you need to find that error before you proceed to the next money columns, which are for the adjusted trial balance. How do we arrive at these figures here in our adjusted trial balance columns? By considering the first four money columns. One by one, from the first account name of cash down to the last one below, which is income summary, look at the first four money columns. Let's say here for cash, there is only one figure, 250,000, which is on the debit column. Therefore, just forward this 250,000 here in the adjusted trial balance debit column also. Same for this accounts receivable. We only have one figure along this row under the debit column. So, just forward this 875,000 to the debit column of the adjusted trial balance. How about for the allowance for bad debts? We have two figures, 40,000 credit and 5,000 credit also. Remember this please, when you have the same side, credit and credit or debit and debit, just add the figures and write the sum under that side. Therefore here, 40,000 credit and 5,000 credit equals 45,000 on the credit side of the adjusted trial balance. How about when the two figures are of opposite sides, one debit and the other credit? We have to subtract and write the difference on the side of the higher figure. That's why here, for the prepaid insurance, 15,250 debit and 4,125 credit, we subtract, equals 11,125 debit. Because 15,250 on the debit side is greater than the 4,125 on the credit side. Let's recap what you have just learned. Debit and debit, you add. Then, write the sum on the debit side of the adjusted trial balance. Credit and credit, you add. Then, place the sum on the credit side. Credit and debit, you subtract. And place the difference on the side of the higher amount. When you have done all the additions and subtractions for each and every account name, up to the income summary here below, just like the first four money columns, you need to get the total debit and the total credit of the adjusted trial balance columns. Again, the total debit must equal the total credit. After that, you can do the last four money columns. Please keep this in mind. When you are already doing the last four money columns, concentrate on the figures under the adjusted trial balance only. Ignore the first 4 money columns. Then, one by one again, from the first account cash to the last one below the income summary account, ask yourself, where must this account be placed? In the income statement or in the statement of financial position? When you have answered your own question, forward the amount found in the adjusted trial balance column to that financial statement. For instance, cash. Where is cash found? Being an asset, it is found in the statement of financial position. So, forward this 250,000 debit to the debit side of the statement of financial position. Then, proceed to accounts receivable. Then, to allowance for budgets. And so on and so forth. Until the last account, income summary. But I'd like to point out some important things here. First, with regards to the withdrawal or drawing account. These benepayo drawings. This account, as you may already know, must actually appear in what financial statement? In the statement of changes in owner's equity. But since we do not have columns for the statement of changes in owner's equity here in the worksheet, this 35,000 pesos debit balance under the adjusted trial balance must be forwarded to the debit column under the statement of financial position. Because strictly speaking, the account name drawings is part of equity, being the opposite of making an investment into the business. And equity is found in the statement of financial position. That's why again, forward the amount of benepayo drawings which can be found under the debit column of the adjusted trial balance in the worksheet to the statement of financial position, debit column, and not to the income statement. Another important thing is about this merchandise inventory. This merchandise inventory end and this income summary, which I all highlighted in yellow. This merchandise inventory of 455,000 is actually the beginning inventory of the year 2019. Where is merchandise inventory beginning found? Is it found in the statement of financial position? No. What appears in the statement of financial position is the merchandise inventory end, not merchandise inventory beginning. Merchandise inventory beginning is part of the computation of the cost of goods sold or cost of sales. Remember? Merchandise inventory beginning, add net purchases to get the cost of goods available for sale. That is why this 455,000 beginning merchandise inventory must be forwarded to the debit column of the income statement in the worksheet. How about this merchandise inventory end? Where is this account found? In the statement of financial position or in the income statement? Actually, in both the statement of financial position and income statement. Merchandise inventory end is an asset and therefore it is found in the statement of financial position and its normal balance is debit. That's why this merchandise inventory end here amounting to 245,000 must be forwarded to the statement of financial position debit column. How about the merchandise inventory end in the income statement? What is its normal balance? Recall that to compute the cost of goods sold or cost of sales, merchandise inventory beginning, add net purchases to arrive at the cost of goods available for sale. Then, less or deduct merchandise inventory end. From that, we know that if the normal balance of purchases is debit, then the merchandise inventory beginning, which is added to the net purchases, must also have a normal balance of debit. And from that cost of goods sold computation, we also must know that since merchandise inventory end is subtracted from the total of merchandise inventory beginning and the net purchases, then the normal balance of merchandise inventory end in the income statement must be the opposite of the normal balance of merchandise inventory beginning and purchases. And therefore, credit is the normal balance of merchandise inventory end in the income statement. And that merchandise inventory end to appear in the income statement is represented here by this income summary account in the amount of 245,000. That's why notice this amount is on the credit column of the adjusted trial balance because the normal balance of merchandise inventory end in the income statement is credit. So this amount of 245,000 must be forwarded here to the credit column of the income statement in the worksheet. After forwarding each amount under the adjusted trial balance columns to the appropriate income statement or statement of financial position columns, the next thing to do is to get the total of each of the last 4 money columns. But this time around, the total debit and the total credit of the income statement columns must not be equal. Likewise, the total debit and the total credit of the statement of financial position columns must not be equal unless the business broke even, meaning unless there is no net income and no net loss. After getting the totals, get the difference between the total debit and the total credit of the income statement columns and write that difference under the smaller amount. Then add 2,540,835.50 plus 137,537.50 equals 2,678,375. On the credit column, 2,678,375 plus 0 equals 2,678,375. Notice, these two figures now must be equal. Because these are total figures, you have to double rule. Do the same procedure for the statement of financial position. Get the difference between the total debit and the total credit of the statement of financial position columns and write that difference under the smaller amount. Then add 2,450,750 plus 0 equals the same amount of 2,450,750. 2,313,212.50 plus 137,537.50 equals 2,450,750. Note again that these two figures must also be equal. And again, don't forget to double rule. And of course, another very important thing for you to make sure, this difference between the total debit and the total credit of the income statement columns must be equal to this difference between the total debit and the total credit of the statement of financial position columns. Otherwise, something must be wrong. In other words, these two figures must be one and the same because they represent the net income or the net loss. The important question then should follow. How will we know whether this figure of 137,537.50 is net income or net loss? There are actually two ways to know. First, compare the total debit with the total credit of the income statement columns. Which total is higher? This debit total or this credit total? This credit total of 2,678,375. Now, knowing that the total credit is higher than the total debit and recalling that the debits in the income statement are the expense and contra sales accounts, while the credits are the revenue and contra purchases accounts, then you should realize that in this case, the total revenues are greater than the total expenses, which means what? There is net income. And the net income amounts to this 137,537.50. Therefore, we must label this row as net income. The second way to know if there is net income or net loss is to observe these two figures. If they are far from each other, like in this case, one is here, the other is on the far end, then there is net income. When they are near or side by side each other, one is written here, while the other is placed here, then there is net loss. A tip or hint for you to remember that is, just think of these two figures as boyfriend and girlfriend. When they are always together or near each other, they quarrel. Therefore, net loss. But when they are apart or far from each other, they miss one another, so they reconcile. Therefore, net income. After doing the worksheet, the next 4 steps of the accounting cycle would be based on this worksheet. And those succeeding steps will be discussed in part 3 of this lecture series on accounting cycle. Have a great day or a restful night.